George Kilpatrick, Inspiration for the Nation, celebrating people we feel good about. It is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And all this month, we've been talking to representatives from Vera House, which is the local domestic violence sexual assault agency in the area and other forms of abuse. And this week, we are talking about shelter services. And these are emergency shelter services for those who might be in a crisis. So, right away, let me give you the 24-hour hotline should this conversation find you or someone that you know in crisis. That's 315-468-3260. And here to help me to understand what shelter is at Vera House, I'm acting as if I don't know who this is. Yes, I do work with Vera House. Of course I do. But Brittany Sanderson is joining us now to help us understand how shelter services work at Vera House. And Brittany, what exactly is your title?
I am the Associate Director of Shelter Services.
And so, what does that mean, Brittany?
That means that I have the privilege of overseeing what we call the resident supervisors. And these staff are here on the what we consider like the off hours. So not during the day. They're here in the evenings, the overnights, and on the weekends. And this is the staff that are really in the heart of it. They're with the residents, they're helping the residents, talking with the residents. So I get to oversee all of those and I get to co-lead the shelter with the director of shelter.
So, what does shelter mean at Vera House?
To me, what shelter means to Vera House and to me is a safe place when you get to that crossroad where there are no other safe places to lay your head down at night.
Mm-hmm. And so, how do people end up at shelter? What are the situations, circumstances that people find themselves in need of these, and how do they actually get there?
That's a great question. And I think the answer is a variety of different things. So we have had clients come to us through the police, right? There was a incident between them and their partner. Police got called. Police are helping them get to a safe place because they can't stay in the home. And they call us. We help them get them into here if that's the appropriate spot for them. We also have people that call us through our crisis line, which the number George just gave, tell us their situation that's going on around domestic violence, sexual violence, or other forms of violence in the community. We do what's called an assessment to make sure that we are the safest place for you. And then we bring you into our shelter. And our shelter is for everybody. So we do not base any of our shelter services on race, gender, creed, sexual orientation. None of those things will stop us from giving you services here at Vera House.
What's the biggest myth that people have about shelter?
Oh, I think the first myth is that we only help women and we only house women and children. And that is completely not true. We have had males in here that were survivors of domestic or sexual violence. We've had those that identify in the LGBTQA plus population here. So it's not just Fair House serving women in our shelter. We serve all that we possibly can in our shelter.
One of the things that you wanted to make sure we talked about is that there are options for individuals and families who find themselves in crisis. And when we say crisis, that means that there's no other alternatives. They're in a situation that may cause them harm in the moment,
Mm-hmm.
and you may need to be. They may need temporary shelter to get away from that situation.
Absolutely, George. And one of the things we say is we have to look at every situation for its situation. So for me, what my threshold is for tolerance and how I see safety and how I see the emergent could be very different than the person sitting in front of me. So
Mm-hmm.
we also have to see where that person's at and what that situation is for them.
Mm-hmm. And so basically, there's no one size fits all, is what you're basically saying.
Correct.
Right. And so I think you would say to people, don't judge your situation, whether, don't prejudge your situation. When in doubt, call the hotline and let us have a conversation with you and walk you through the
Absolutely,
shelter.
George. I think one of the other myths is when we talk about emotional and mental abuse, the concept of, well, my partner didn't put their hands on me, so I must not need shelter. When reality, that mental and emotional abuse can lead to suicide, it can lead to depression, anxiety, and all those things could be very dangerous for somebody.
So,
Self-harm. So we have to think about it in a multitude of ways.
so that's interesting. So when someone calls and they may not be physically in crisis, how would then you assess whether because of emotional and psychological abuse that they are eligible for shelter services, even because people, I think everybody pretty much understands that physical abuse in the moment is dangerous, and that, or prior physical abuse, right? Because it may not happen and may not be happening right now, which is another thing, right? So
Correct.
how do you make that assessment around psychological emotional abuse?
It can be hard. I always say that we give the clients the benefit of the doubt.
Mm-hmm.
They're living in that situation. So
Right.
when we're talking to them, lots of times what I've noticed with working with clients that have, to the point in where they are in the relationship, have gotten to emotional and mental and it hasn't escalated yet, it will eventually escalate. And if they're calling, they're already worried that it's going to be escalating. And when talking with them, it's almost reading between the lines and asking questions that get them to talk about what's going on, get them to talk about how they're feeling, get them to talk about what they're worried about. And that's what our staff is trained to do. We're trained to have these conversations with individuals who are at this point of, maybe they don't even recognize it yet as a form of abuse, and they just know it doesn't feel great. So it also could just be them trying to figure out, what is it that I'm going through? How do I put a name to it? And how do I just get it to stop?
And do you find, we're talking Brittany Sanderson? She's the associate director of shelter services at Vera House. The shelter is 24 hours. There's two locations in the community, and the purpose of it obviously is to provide temporary shelter. I'm sure the question you get asked most often is, how long is the temporary shelter services? How long can people be take advantage of those services?
It's really individualized, so it depends on
The
the
situ-
case. It depends on what's going on. It is very short term. So on average, we're getting people in and out within 2 months. There
mm-hmm.
are significant amount of barriers that can get in the way of somebody getting out that quickly, and it can be immigration status, language. Right now during COVID, the housing, is there housing open for a single or a family of five? So the size of the family is really hard too, of like trying to find people of housing. So it's, again, not a one size fits all. I wish it was, because then it would be so easy. I could help everybody and just give them the map, but it's not. And on average, it's about 2 months.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, and I'm also thinking that when people call, and it's deemed that shelter is appropriate for them, but may or may not be, and so there are other options that people can take advantage of.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we are trying so hard to do at shelter is, when we assess, is shelter a fit for them? So are we the safe location? Because it might be that they live in proximity to the shelter. So we're not going to bring them in so that their abuser sees them. Like, that is not us keeping them, the client, safe. So we
Right.
really do this, a really deep safety assessment with them to know which location is safe.
Mm-hmm.
Or right now, we have been full. As soon as we have an open bed, it is automatically full. So we are also helping clients who need shelter to either try to find shelter within the community as the other shelters, or do we need to start exploring outside of the county temporarily until we can get you back to the county and get you back safely. Outside of those services, we also have advocacy in clinical that can also help in a different way for clients who cannot come into shelter for whatever reason it may be.
Once you are in shelter, Brittany, what are the things you can do for me to help me to get back on my feet? What are the services that are available? You mentioned some of them with the clinical and counseling support. What
Yep.
else can you help me with while I try to get back on my feet?
The first thing I think of is, what safety do you need?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So when you're here, you're with us. right inside our doors, you're safe. You're going to have to leave those doors at some point and you can't stay here forever. So to do that, what do you need? Do you need an order of protection? Do you want to keep your apartment but need your landlord to change locks and things like that? So it's the assessment of what is it that you would like to do and how do we help you do that safely? Once we determine with the client what the client wants to do, that's when we can then say, okay, so let's fill out this application for this housing, or here's the resource for this housing. Um, you want parenting classes, here's a resource for parenting classes. So for the most part, it's really us sitting down with the client and figuring out what the client wants and helping the client get the services lined up for them prior to leaving the facility.
You also, I understand you also assist people with helping to find housing, like you said, filling out applications.
Hmm.
Um, Meals are provided at shelter, I understand,
Absolutely,
right?
they are. Yep, 3
Also,
meals a day.
medical care, even helping with employment, I understand.
So with medical care, we do not offer any medical care on site because we do not have any nurses, doctors, um, and you never want me to take care of you medically because I have no idea how to do any of that.
Right, right.
However, we would help you get connected to where you need to go. So if you need insurance, we can help, right? Start filling out paperwork for insurance. Or if you need to transfer doctors because your doctor's office is no longer safe because your abuser knows where that is. Those things we can definitely help with and get you connected to where you need to be with those. So definitely in that aspect, we would help with that. In terms of employment, we work with Jobs Plus. So if it's something that you're having a hard time finding employment, which I know right now during COVID can be very difficult. So a lot of people don't know what to do. We can help find resources or internally help you with resumes, help look with jobs for you and see what do you want to do and where do you want to live and is there a job in proximity to that. Those are all definitely things that we can help with.
Yeah, and as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about helping survivors go on their healing journey. And
Hmm.
sometimes that includes classes, sometimes that
Hmm.
includes support groups.
Yep.
And also, I want you to speak to the person who's watching or listening to this, Brittany, who is in an abusive relationship, and I'm not even thinking whether they need shelter or not, but a lot of times I'm finding that people are reluctant to call or even
Hmm.
start their journey. And I think I want you to speak to the fact that you don't have to have all of the answers even when you make the call. You
Hmm.
may not even really be ready to leave the relationship at that point, but the fact that the call helps you to have a space to offer to give dialogue in a non-judgmental way that helps you make the decision that's best for you. Did I just say what you would have probably said?
You summed it up pretty well, George. I would also say that making that call is one of the scariest things someone will ever have to do.
Hmm.
One, it- you're admitting out loud that something so significantly personal is going on that's not healthy, and that's unbelievably hard to do. So I think that piece of just recognizing what you're trying to get yourself to do and all of the emotional, mental, and strength you need to make that call. So that's the first thing that I always think of it is how difficult it is. And it's not as easy as just picking up the phone. The other thing I think of too is we take anonymous calls. So if it's something that you're like, I am not ready to fully admit out loud and say that my name is Brittany, I can call and say, hi, George, I'm just looking for some information. Can I ask you a few questions?
Right.
And ask those questions. And then we do ask you, do you mind giving us your name? And you can just say, I'm sorry, I don't want to give my name. And that's okay. You don't have to.
And you also have a chat service as well.
We do. So this is new and exciting. It's on our website, which is verahouse.org. There's a chat box that you click on, and then it's like sending an email or texting. And what the great thing about that is, if you need to immediately exit, there is an emergency exit button
Hmm.
that completely exits it completely from your screen so that no one can see what you were doing on the screen.
It's really exciting, and I think the other thing that families should consider or think about or understand is that you do take children, and so
Hmm.
you can. There's also ways to negotiate bus routes for kids who, like for example, if my school is somewhere else, is there a way to negotiate that in terms of getting my kid to school?
Yes, that's it's called the McKinney-Vento Act, and what that does is that protects those who come into shelter are now considered homeless, right? Because they don't have a safe place to be, which means wherever school district you are, they have to provide busing to pick up the kids and take the kids to school. So let's say you're out in Fayetteville, right? And you are coming to stay at our shelter. So let's say our shelter was at our main office at James Street. They would have to provide busing from Fayetteville to James Street and then from James Street to Fayetteville so that kids are not missing out on their education. The other thing that we are trying our hardest to do, knowing with a lot of schooling is at home. Luckily, a lot of the schoolings, their kids are getting ThinkPads or tablets or Chromebooks, whatever the districts are giving them. And we have Wi-Fi now, and we are helping the parents say, what do you need to help your kid stay in school and help your kid get the education that they need? Because that is another struggle, and that can be another reason why a parent doesn't want to come into shelter. How do they
Right.
do this learning for their kids? They have to do all this on their own. So again, that's something we can help with.
Well, speaking about help, you just got some really nice help from Mary Kay Cosmetics. What did Mary Kay do for you? So,
Um,
so Mary Kay just the agency just received a $20,000 grant from Mary Kay to help with emergency type needs. And so, Brittany, speak to what some of those needs might be in an emergency that now you have 20,000 K to play with.
that sounds like a small amount of money, but for a non-for-profit, let me tell you, I can spend $20,000 on emergency services. It could be a multitude of things. It could be food. It could be products for all of our residents inside of shelter. So one of the things I think of is, and I tell people to think of when they're making donations, right? Is think of everything you have at home. That's what our residents need. They
Mm.
need shampoo, they need soap, they need slippers, they need socks and underwear. Those are things that they might not have time to take with them. So when I think of that money, I'm like, wow, we could do that. We also can do other things where we are trying really hard to find safe ways to get people to us. And we've been starting to use Uber and Lyft.
Mm.
And how do we get people from the bus station, or how do we get people to this? And what if it's in the middle of the night and we don't have somebody to drive the van to go get them? So it could also be for services like that. It could be for services um, to help with getting a lawyer if we couldn't get a free lawyer. And it really could be just about anything that we couldn't find a service in house for them, or we couldn't find somehow one of our connections to maybe do it pro bono. Or when we get to those crossroads where there is a gap, that money can help with that.
Wonderful. And so, Brittany, speaking about help, you talked about, you casually mentioned some things that would be helpful to shelter. And I know during the season, our the donations to Vera House, generally speaking, but specifically shelter, increased during this time. So, if people are thinking about donating, I know that there's a wish list that we
Hmm.
publish sometimes, even on Amazon, I believe, as well. But
Yes.
what kinds of things uh, do you typically need, and what things can't you take right now because of other restrictions?
Mhm.
But for example, you said Uber and Lyft, so it would seem to me that having the opportunity to provide ride shares for people will be. Now, how do you do that with shelter? That's an interesting thing. How do you do?
Yep. So we have a private account.
Okay.
So that way it's one of the great things about Uber and Lyft is there's some safety features in it where you can share your location. So and only like not everybody at the agency has access to the account. So I have access to that as the associate director. So when I'm sending someone in Uber or Lyft, I can watch on my phone uh, where that car is going. So there's also this piece of safety that I can say, okay, George got picked up at Wegmans and is going to get dropped off at James Street, and I can watch that car move on the map, and I know right where exactly where it is. So that helps us have a different level of safety that we've never had before. So yeah, things like Uber gift cards, Lyft gift cards, those are definitely things that help with us.
Uh,
I think,
and what other things?
yeah, household items.
Mm,
So when I think of donating, I always think of the first time I moved into that first apartment on my own. I had nothing. That is basically what our residents are moving out of shelter to. And we can give them some things, but we can't give everybody everything. So even if it's pots and pans, dishes, anything like that, cleaning supplies, we are trying our hardest to give everybody cleaning supplies when they leave here, knowing that right now we have to make sure they're going into a safe home in terms of health wise too, and making sure they have cleaning supplies that kill germs and are helping in that way. So anything that you would think of that you would want if you moved into a new place, that would be things that our residents would want.
and again, the Mary Kay Foundation
Mhm.
in addition, is helping Vera House with the emergency ability to purchase some of those things, like
Mhm.
household furniture, secure, helping people with security deposits,
Yep.
funds to secure birth certificates and IDs, and
Yeah.
moving things out of storage. Right, those are the
Yeah.
kinds of things the Mary Kay Foundation. So I wanted to reiterate that, but also everyday people can make donations.
Mhm.
Guess what? Even hair care products, especially those that are ethnically, African American hair care, any kind of hair care products, these kinds of things that are unique to people. Those are also things that I'm sure people can donate as well.
Thank you so much, George, for mentioning that piece around those types of products, because those are something that we very rarely get in, and they are extremely, extremely needed.
There you go. All right. So, um, if you want to support Vera House, obviously verahouse.org. If people want to arrange to have things donated, uh, not only to support shelter services, but to Vera House, they can call our main office, 315-425-0818. But remember, the 24-hour hotline is 315-468-3260, verahouse.org. I think we have a wish list online. I'm not sure if we do. If we do,
Yes,
and
and it gets updated.
it's updated.
Yep.
But Brittany told us some of the things that are needed. But obviously, we hope that you never need shelter. But if you
Mm.
do, it is there for you. And they've got a team. Oh, we didn't talk about this, but you got case managers. You got people like that help
Yeah.
people navigate, not only advocates but also case managers and supervisors.
Mhm.
And also, living at shelter means that you're in a communal living space. That means that everybody's got a little share of doing everything. So,
Yes.
and you got some great community support. So
Mhm.
that's how shelter services, or the Vera House Shelter Services. And again, those services are accessed by 315-468-3260. It may or may not be for you, but certainly making that call is the first step. Brittany Sanderson. This is only the second time I've had to say that. We appreciate you joining us, and thank you for the work that you do in helping survivors heal and begin their journey.
Thank you, George.
Inspiration for the nation.